Imagine, imagine, if you will, a map of global power.
Right.
Like a vast, glowing digital projection showing, every single node of influence on the entire planet.
A big board.
Yeah, exactly. And on this map, you zoom in on the United States Department of Defense, the Pentagon.
The ultimate heavyweight.
Right. You are looking at an institution with a budget that's what, nearing $1 trillion?
Yeah, getting very close to that.
They've got carrier strike groups, advanced stealth bombers, global satellite networks, millions of personnel.
Just massive physical and institutional footprint.
Exactly. On a mathematical scale of institutional weight, it is a total leviathan. But, and here's where it gets crazy. I want you to pan across that same imaginary map, away from Washington, D.C., all the way down to a tiny, just completely nondescript office building in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Oh, this is the best part.
Right. Inside is a paper shell company, owned by the late Jeffrey Epstein.
Yep.
And it has no actual physical operations, no scientific staff, and basically nothing but a mailbox and some tax forms.
It's just the ultimate David and Goliath visual, really.
It is. But here is the hook. And frankly, it's the entire reason we are doing this deep dive today. If you run the actual topological math on the hidden networks of global influence, that empty offshore shell company mathematically outranked the Pentagon in terms of structural power.
It's wild. It's completely counterintuitive, but the math is undeniable.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today we are just completely changing the way you look at the world. We are peeling back the curtain on how global power, institutional influence, and elite networks actually operate.
And we're doing it with real data.
Yes. We are throwing away the Hollywood-style smoke-filled rooms, the comic book villains, the grand conspiracy theories of a hidden ruling council pulling the strings.
Because the reality is actually much more interesting.
Way more interesting. Instead, we're looking at the math, the overlapping incentives, and the hidden financial plumbing that literally dictates reality.
We are moving past the speculation, right, and into the actual architecture of influence. And I have to say, the data we have to do this today is just staggering.
It is a massive stack of sources for this deep dive. So let me just lay out what we're working with for you, the listener, because the pedigree of this data is vital. First, we have the Relay Atlas.
A full database.
Right, the full database. This is a painstaking, incredibly detailed mapping containing exactly 364 specific nodes.
Which are institutions, think tanks, federal agencies.
Exactly. And they're connected by 851 edges, which represent the flows of money and personnel between them.
It's a complete map of the ecosystem.
Then we have the Omnius Verification First Project reports, which analyze that exact data to detail what they call the relay-shaped power model.
Which fundamentally challenges how we think about corruption and coordination.
It really does. And we also have massive real-world document leaks to back up the theory. We're diving into the Paradise Papers from the ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists.
Huge data leak.
Massive.
Yeah.
Plus, we are bringing in complex macroeconomic data from analyst Jeff Snyder.
Right, looking at the offshore money markets.
Yep. And to top it all off, we have a highly specific graph-theoretic computational analysis.
The war game.
The war game, where they stress test these networks to find the, quote, minimum stable network.
Yeah.
So our mission today is basically threefold.
Lay it out.
First, we map how influence actually flows through the U.S. decision system. Second, we explain why this network relies so heavily on something called opacity to survive.
Crucial concept, opacity.
And third, we mathematically calculate what it would take to design or dismantle a highly resilient power structure.
That's the edge-match topology stuff. It's fascinating.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with this idea of the relay-shaped power model. Because the very first thing our sources demand is that we discard the centralized conspiracy theory.
Right. And the traditional conspiracy model is incredibly seductive.
Easy, right?
Exactly. It's easy. It assumes there is a hidden center, a boardroom somewhere directing events from above with this omniscient coordination.
Like a Bond villain.
Yeah, exactly. We like that idea because it gives a face to the chaos, But the Omnius Verification First project argues that this framework just completely over-attributes intentionality.
How so?
Well, it collapses distinct, sometimes competing actors into a single, unified will. The reality mapped in the sources is much more complex, far less cinematic, and frankly, much more resilient to exposure.
Because there's no single head to chop off.
Exactly. They introduced the relay-shaped power model. In this framework, influence doesn't come from a boss shouting orders. It propagates through overlapping layers of institutions.
Okay, let's break those layers down because the Relay Atlas defines them very clearly. If we look at the flow of influence, it typically starts with capital accumulation.
So this is your massive asset managers, the hedge funds, the mega banks.
Right. From there, the capital flows into philanthropy and foundation grants.
Getting washed a bit, yeah.
Yep. Those grants then fund policy think tanks. And in the sources, they specifically look at places like the Rand Corporation or the Carnegie
And
Endowment.
the big idea factories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then from the think tanks, the policy papers flow into government personnel and federal agencies. And finally, you get the actual regulatory implementation. It's an assembly line.
An assembly line of consensus. And the coordination mechanism here isn't a secret memo. It happens through what the researchers call incentive convergence and elite circulation.
Which is just academic speak for the revolving door.
Yeah, most people just call it the revolving door. It's a system that reproduces influence through pure continuity. You have a relatively small, highly credentialed class of professionals circulating constantly.
Just bouncing around.
Exactly.
Right.
Among government roles, think tanks, financial firms, media institutions, they carry their assumptions, their personal relationships, and their mutual trust across boundaries every single time they switch jobs.
I mean, I see this all the time in the news, Someone leaves a high-level post at the State Department, and then literally the next week, they are a senior fellow at a think tank.
Yep.
And then 6 months later, they are on the board of a defense contractor. And 2 years later, they are back in the executive branch as a cabinet secretary.
And the sources emphasize that none of this is necessarily illegal.
Right.
Much of it is perfectly legal and operates completely in the open. But it creates a profound tension for a functioning democracy, because this network possesses a continuity that is entirely independent of democratic elections.
Right. It doesn't matter who you vote for.
Exactly. And so we experience what the model brilliantly terms a legitimacy recession.
A legitimacy recession. Wow. That is a heavy, almost atmospheric term.
I think it captures the mood perfectly. It means the public increasingly feels that voting doesn't actually change the trajectory of the country.
And mathematically, they aren't entirely wrong, are they?
Not at all. The underlying structural network, the people actually developing the white papers, funding the think tanks, writing the complex regulatory frameworks, and staffing the sub-cabinet agencies, it survives administrative turnover completely intact.
Wow.
A new president comes in, but the relay network just absorbs the shock and keeps functioning.
Okay, I have to push back a little here on behalf of the listener, because if I'm hearing this, I'm thinking, okay, if it's not a conspiracy, isn't incentive convergence just a polite academic way of saying the game is rigged? Like it feels like we're just rebranding systemic corruption. Because if I look at a massive school of fish in the ocean, right?
Yeah.
They're swimming along, and suddenly they all dart to the left at the exact same millisecond. To an outside observer, it looks incredibly coordinated.
Sure.
But there's no boss fish with a tiny megaphone giving the order to turn left. They're just responding to the same water pressure, the same environmental incentives, and their, physical proximity to one another.
Right.
But the end result is exactly the same as if they had a leader. They move as a single, unified entity.
I love that analogy, and it aligns perfectly with the data. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sources actually use formal network theory to explain how that school of fish operates in the political realm.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They describe a phenomenon called a percolation phase transition.
Okay, a percolation phase transition. That sounds like something from materials science. Break that down for me.
It is from physics originally. Think about how water turns into ice. It doesn't happen linearly.
Right.
The temperature drops, and the water molecules start moving slower, but it's still liquid water.
Still sloshing around.
Exactly. It's still liquids to liquid, and then suddenly, boom, you hit a specific critical threshold of temperature and density, and the entire structure locks into a solid crystal lattice.
The phase transition.
Right. The state of the matter fundamentally changes all at once. In social network theory, a percolation phase transition happens when the density of connections between people hits a critical threshold.
So below that threshold, what does the network look like?
Well, below that density, professionals just influence things locally. A think tank scholar might convince a single senator of a policy. A banker might influence one specific regulator.
It's fragmented.
Highly fragmented. But as the density of ties increases, as more and more of these people share the same Ivy League educational backgrounds, sit on the same corporate boards, attend the same exclusive conferences, and rotate through the same agencies, you hit that freezing point.
The water turns to ice.
Suddenly, the network undergoes a phase transition. And what emerges is what they call a giant connected component.
Meaning the local influence is no longer local.
Exactly. An idea that starts at a private equity dinner in Manhattan can instantly percolate through a think tank in Washington into a draft bill in Congress and onto the teleprompter of a major news anchor, almost simultaneously.
That's terrifying.
It's not a master plan, though. It's a structural inevitability of that sheer density. The water pressure dictates the movement of the school.
So the fish are packed so tightly, with so many overlapping social and professional connections, that one twitch sends a wave through the whole school instantly.
Precisely.
And to prove how this works, we don't have to rely on metaphors. We can look at the exact hard mathematical metrics from the Relay Atlas that reveal the network's hidden power players. Which brings us back to my absolute favorite statistic in the entire deep dive.
The Ledger B anomaly.
Yes. Let's talk about Ledger B of the Relay Atlas.
Yes.
This data set is just fascinating. It maps out those 364 nodes, the institutions, the federal agencies, the key individuals.
Right.
And it maps the 851 edges, or relationships, connecting them. To figure out who actually holds the power, the researchers use a network metric called betweenness centrality.
A very important term for this.
Yeah. So the network's root node, which is essentially the mathematical center representing the entire U.S. decision system, scores a massive 0.5215 on this metric.
Which you would expect.
Right.
Right.
Then, the Securities and Exchange Commission, a major regulatory body, scores 0.0210. But here is the absolute shocker. Jeffrey Epstein's Southern Trust Company scores 0.0180.
Wow.
That outranks the actual United States Department of Defense, which sits at 0.0151.
See, we have to be incredibly precise here because this is the data point most likely to be wildly misinterpreted by someone just glancing at the chart.
Right, because it sounds crazy.
It does.
Right.
We need to clarify what betweenness centrality actually measures because it is not a measure of institutional weight.
It's not about budgets.
No, it doesn't measure your budget, your firepower, or the number of employees you have. The Department of Defense obviously has vastly more resources than an offshore shell company.
Right. The Pentagon has nuclear submarines and 2 million employees.
Mm-hmm.
Southern Trust had some paperwork filed in the Virgin Islands. It may be a rented desk. So
Right.
how does the math say the desk is more powerful?
Because betweenness centrality measures structural positioning, not mass. Specifically, it counts how often a node sits on the absolute shortest path between two other nodes in the network. A node with very few direct connections can score incredibly high on this metric if those few connections happen to be the only links bridging to otherwise completely separate massive clusters of the network.
Ah.
High centrality paired with a low number of direct connections is the mathematical signature of what network scientists call a structural broker.
Okay, let me translate this for you, the listener, into a physical landscape.
Yeah.
Imagine a vast, sprawling map. On the left side of the map, you have a massive, bustling megacity with millions of people. Let's call it the financial sector.
Okay.
On the right side of the map, separated by a deep, impassable canyon, is another massive megacity, let's call it the political sector.
Right.
Now imagine there is a tiny 2-lane dirt road with a rickety wooden bridge that happens to be the absolute only crossing over that canyon.
Bottleneck.
The dirt road itself is small. It's cheap. It has barely any physical mass compared to the skyscrapers in the cities. Yeah. But if you own the deed to that bridge, you control the flow of everything between those two worlds.
You control everything.
You control the capital, the personnel, the information. That dirt road has immense betweenness centrality.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The Department of Defense is like a massive skyscraper within one of those cities. It is huge and has thousands of doors, but it mostly connects to itself and its immediate defense industry neighbors.
It doesn't bridge the canyon.
It doesn't bridge vastly different worlds. Southern Trust, on the other hand, was the dirt road over the canyon. It was a structural broker. According to the investigative reports and the Omnius analysis, Jeffrey Epstein registered Southern Trust Company in the U.S. Virgin Islands in 2013.
Right.
He applied for and secured highly lucrative Economic Development Commission tax benefits, claiming the company was a, quote, DNA database consulting and data analysis firm.
A DNA database consulting firm. But they did absolutely no genetic research,
Right,
no.
none whatsoever. When investigators eventually looked into it, they found zero evidence of legitimate scientific work. No labs, no genome sequencing, no biotech patents.
Nothing.
Instead, it operated primarily as a highly opaque financial vehicle. Tax filings showed declared earnings exceeding $200 million over roughly 5 years, booked against a completely fabricated business purpose.
200 million.
Yeah, what it actually did was provide him with the formal legal infrastructure to maintain elite banking relationships, move massive amounts of international funds, and sign contracts.
Because his 2008 sex offender conviction made it impossible for him to operate through normal, public-facing Wall Street channels.
Exactly. One Virgin Islands official, when deposed, reportedly called the company a narrative device rather than an operating business.
A narrative device. That is one of the wildest phrases I've ever heard in a legal context. It was literally a mathematical bridge disguised as a biotech firm, built solely to move capital quietly across the network canyon.
Exactly.
But Southern Trust is just one specific flavor of a much larger menu of hidden plumbing. If you are sitting there listening to this, you have to be wondering, how exactly does this whole system obscure these massive flows of influence and money?
It's a great question.
Like, how does a fake DNA company clear $200 million through the global banking system without someone in compliance waving a massive red flag? They must be breaking the law constantly, right?
You would think so, but the reality is much more sophisticated. They utilize something the sources call performative compliance.
Okay, let's unpack this. What does performative compliance look like in practice?
Performative compliance is the art of designing systems that perfectly satisfy formal regulatory checkboxes while completely maintaining operational secrecy.
So you're not hiding for the regulators.
You don't ignore the regulators at all. You overwhelm them with the exact paperwork they ask for. You provide the disclosures, you fill out the KYC, and your customer forms, you submit the quarterly filings.
Right.
But the information you submit is so intensely layered, fragmented, and deliberately opaque that external oversight becomes practically impossible.
Needle in a haystack.
Worse, it's a haystack of needles. It's a system optimized for legal defensibility rather than transparency. You are technically complying with the letter of the law, which gives you administrative maneuverability.
So if a regulator comes knocking on the door of the dirt road bridge, you don't fight them. You hand them 10,000 pages of schematics for the bridge, but none of the pages actually tell them who is driving the trucks across it.
Precisely. And this is where we have to talk about the scale of this opacity, which brings us to the Paradise Papers.
Oh, man.
The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the ICIJ, received a leak of 13.4 million documents.
13.4 million.
We are talking about terabytes of data from offshore law firms, corporate registries, wealth management trust companies. The scale was so massive that the journalists had to use encrypted systems like Veracrypt, which utilizes double encryption with hidden and invisible volumes just to protect the data. And to understand it, they couldn't just read the PDFs. They had to use advanced graph database software like Neo4j and visualization tools like Linkurious just to map the complex, sprawling connections of the wealthy elite. It completely exposed how offshore legal structures shield these capital flows.
It blew the lid off the shadow economy.
It did. But here is a crucial analytical distinction made by the Omnius researchers. And this is where a lot of independent researchers go totally off the rails.
Okay.
People look at the Paradise Papers, they look at global finance, they look at private equity, and they tend to conflate three entirely separate offshore adjacent systems into one giant monolithic conspiracy.
They lump it all together.
Right. The relay model gains its rigorous precision by demanding that we keep these three systems strictly apart.
Okay, this is vital for anyone trying to actually understand the plumbing. Let's lay them out. What are the three systems? Walk us through the first one.
System number one is tax haven secrecy. This is what the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers before them mostly exposed. This system is fundamentally about profit shifting and hiding beneficial ownership.
Meaning concealing who actually owns the money.
Yes. Let's say you are a billionaire and you want to buy a $50 million yacht, but you don't want your name on the public registry.
Makes sense.
And you don't want to pay the taxes associated with the capital gains used to buy it. You don't just buy the yacht. You hire a law firm in the Cayman Islands to set up a trust.
Okay.
That trust owns a shell company in the British Virgin Islands. That shell company owns a subsidiary in Panama, and that subsidiary buys the yacht.
Wow. So many layers.
Right. So when investigators look at the yacht's registration, all they see is a Panamanian corporate entity. The true human being at the top of the chain, the beneficial owner, is shielded by layers of legal secrecy. It's a legal and fiscal mechanism primarily designed to obscure identity and avoid domestic taxation.
Got it. System 1 is a cloaking device for identity. What's number 2?
System number 2 is the Eurodollar system, and this is entirely different.
Okay.
This is offshore bank funding and money markets operating beyond U.S. reserve requirements. It has almost nothing to do with hiding a billionaire's yacht and everything to do with how global banks fund their daily operations.
This is what macroeconomic analyst Jeff Snyder is always screaming about, right?
Mm.
In the source stack, we have Snyder's data going back years, warning about this massive hidden monetary system. He calls Eurodollars a black hole lurking in the shadows of the global economy.
Snyder's analysis is critical here. A Eurodollar isn't a European currency. It simply refers to any U.S. dollar-denominated deposit held at a bank outside of the United States.
Oh, okay. So just dollars held overseas.
Exactly. If a bank in London or Tokyo holds U.S. dollars, those are Eurodollars. Because those deposits are physically and legally outside U.S. jurisdiction, the banks holding them avoid domestic Federal Reserve regulations.
They can play by their own rules.
Yes. They don't have to meet the same reserve requirements, and they don't have to pay FDIC deposit insurance assessments. This allows them to lend those dollars out and create credit on much, much narrower profit margins. It's a massive, unregulated shadow banking system.
Okay, but I want to stop here and trace the mechanical plumbing of this. Because in the sources, Snyder connects this abstract offshore banking stuff to very visceral, real-world economic breakdowns.
He does.
He points to Japanese government bills being the epicenter of collateral alarms in late 2023 and warnings about a $3 trillion repo market crisis where SOFR rates break above the Fed's target.
Very technical stuff.
Right, but he even connects a shadow plumbing to Main Street, citing the Delta CEO warning about empty flights or Wendy's and McDonald's closing stores because consumer traffic is collapsing.
Yes.
Help me and the listener bridge that gap. How does a repo market crisis in offshore collateral lead to a Wendy's closing in Ohio? Walk me through that causal chain step by step.
It's a brilliant question, and tracing that plumbing is how you understand real economic power. Let's create a hypothetical scenario based on Snyder's framework.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine a major international bank in London. Let's call them Bank A. Bank A needs $1 billion in cash overnight to balance its books. To get that cash, they go to the offshore repo market, which is basically a giant pawn shop for banks.
Pawn shop for banks, got it.
They go to Bank B in the Cayman Islands and say, give us $1 billion overnight and we will give you $1 billion worth of Japanese government bonds as collateral. If we don't pay you back tomorrow, you keep the bonds.
Okay, so the Japanese bonds are the pawn shop collateral.
Right. But now, let's say the market gets spooked, maybe there's inflation data or a geopolitical shock. Suddenly, Bank B looks at those Japanese bonds and says, we don't think these are worth $1 billion anymore. They're too risky. We are rejecting this collateral, or we are demanding a massive haircut.
Uh-oh.
Instantly, Bank A in London cannot get the overnight cash it needs. The offshore lending market freezes.
The pawn shop is closed.
The pawn shop is closed. Now, Bank A has a massive dollar shortage. Because they are short on cash, they immediately pull back on all their lending to conserve capital. They tighten their credit standards globally.
And that spreads.
This freeze cascades across the ocean to onshore U.S. banks who also rely on this interbank lending.
I see where this is going.
Right. So now a mid-sized logistics company in Ohio goes to its local commercial bank to renew its line of credit so it can make payroll and buy new trucks. The local bank, facing the ripple effects of the offshore freeze, says, sorry, credit is tight. We are pulling your credit line.
Wow.
The logistics company suddenly has no operating cash. To survive, they have to lay off 500 warehouse workers.
And those 500 warehouse workers who just lost their jobs suddenly stop eating out. They stop buying Baconators. And 6 months later, the local Wendy's franchise sees its consumer traffic collapse, and they shut their doors.
Exactly. The invisible offshore shadow plumbing the Eurodollar collateral market dictated the Main Street reality. The Federal Reserve might be saying the economy is fine, but the shadow money supply contracted, and real people lost their jobs.
That's incredible.
The Eurodollar system is about regulatory arbitrage for bank funding and credit creation. It is fundamentally a different beast than tax haven secrecy.
Wow. Okay, that makes it incredibly clear. So System 1 hides identity. System 2 sidesteps the Federal Reserve to create shadow credit. What is System 3?
System 3 is structured private credit. This is primarily about accounting arbitrage and off-balance sheet treatment. The sources use a very modern example. Anthropic, the AI company, securing a massive $35 billion compute facility.
$35 billion. That's a mind-boggling amount of money for a tech startup.
It is, but they don't just take out a $35 billion traditional loan and put it on Anthropic's balance sheet.
Right.
That would ruin their financial ratios. Instead, they use large special purpose vehicles, or SPVs. These are distinct corporate entities created specifically for one project.
Just shell companies with a specific job.
Essentially, the SPV borrows the money, builds the data centers, and leases the compute power back to Anthropic. This is an onshore, largely investment-grade deal. It's not about avoiding reserves like Eurodollars, and it's not about hiding identity like tax havens.
It's just accounting magic.
Purely about structuring the debt so that it lives in a separate accounting bucket, allowing the main company to look far more profitable and unburdened by debt than it actually is.
Okay, so we have tax havens, Eurodollars, and structured private credit. But let me ask the crucial question for the listener. Why does keeping these three separate matter? Why can't we just lump it all together as, shady financial stuff that rich people do?
What's fascinating here, and what the Omnius researchers stress repeatedly, is that collapsing these three distinct systems into one narrative is exactly how false, deranged conspiracies are manufactured.
Oh, I see.
If you assume a tax evasion shell company is the same thing as a Eurodollar interbank loan, which is the same thing as an AI company's compute funding, you suffer from what the sources call pattern completion bias.
Pattern completion bias. Your brain fills in the blanks.
Your brain connects dots that shouldn't be connected. You assume that because these things are adjacent, maybe a hedge fund uses a Cayman Island lawyer for an SPV, and that same lawyer once set up a tax haven trust for a politician. They must be a single, coordinated machine acting with one sinister will.
Right. You get out the red string and the cork board.
Exactly. You end up with a whiteboard full of red string pointing at everyone as part of a global cabal. Understanding their distinct legal and functional boundaries is how we analyze power rigorously. We have to separate the systems to understand the mechanisms.
Adjacency is not coordination. That is a fantastic rule of thumb for anyone trying to navigate modern media. So up to this point, we've been observing how the network is currently shaped. We know it relies on structural brokers like the Southern Trust Dirt Road. We know it uses performative compliance to overwhelm regulators. And we know it thrives on a scale-free, hub-and-spoke architecture, where a few highly connected nodes link everything together.
The current state of things, yes.
But what if we inverse the question? This is where the deep dive takes a massive pivot. What if an adversary wanted to actively attack this network? Or, on the flip side, what if we wanted to design a network from scratch that could never be taken down?
Now we are moving from observation into the realm of architectural design. We are utilizing the formal mathematical analysis provided in the sources regarding the search for the minimum stable network.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want you to think of this next part as a digital war game. If you are a civil engineer building a power grid, or a general building a military communication grid, or a financial architect building a banking system, which geometric shape survives the longest when a highly intelligent, adaptive hacker is actively trying to take out your most vital bridges.
To test this scientifically, the researchers formalized an adversary budget.
An adversary budget.
Yes. In this simulation, the attacker isn't all-powerful. They have specific tools. First, they can execute arbitrary node deletions. In the math, we call this FV.
Yeah.
This means the attacker can just remove an institution or a person from the board completely. A server goes down, a bank goes bankrupt, a key official is fired.
Boom, node gone.
Second, they can execute arbitrary edge cuts, denoted as fe. This means they can sever the relationship or the flow of funds between two nodes, leaving the nodes themselves intact. A communication line is jammed or a contract is canceled.
So you snip the wire between them.
Exactly.
Hey.
And third, and most importantly, they can execute targeted hub deletions, denoted as H.
Targeted hub deletions. This is crucial, meaning the hacker doesn't just attack at random hoping to get lucky. They look at the entire map of the network. They identify the biggest, most connected hubs of the structural brokers with all the between-us centrality, and they take them out first.
It is an adaptive, intelligent attack. They snipe the biggest hub. The network stutters, reroutes its traffic, and recalculates. The hacker looks at the map again, finds the new biggest hub, and snipes that one.
It's a ruthless.
It is a relentless, optimized assault on the network structure. So to find out what survives this, the researchers ran a computational simulation comparing 3 theoretical network shapes. And to make it a fair fight, they made sure all 3 were edge-matched.
Okay, pause there. Edge-matched. What does that mean exactly?
This means all 3 networks had exactly 500 nodes and roughly 1,500 edges connecting them, giving them an average degree or connection rate of 6.
So it's an apples-to-apples comparison.
Yeah.
You have the exact same amount of building materials, the exact same amount of asphalt and steel for all 3 shapes.
Yeah.
No one gets extra budget.
The playing field is completely level. The 3 shapes they tested are, number 1, the Barabasi-Albert scale-free model. This represents the current hub and relay shape of the U.S. power system we've been discussing all episode. Number 2, a random 6 regular expander graph. And number 3, the Harary graph, specifically HSEC 6500.
Okay, before we run the war game, we need to build these shapes in the theater of the mind so the listener can visualize what the math represents. Shape number 1, the scale-free model. Think of a massive airline route map.
A great way to picture it.
You have a few colossal hubs like O'Hare in Chicago or JFK in New York with hundreds of spokes shooting out of them. Most airports are tiny, with only 1 or 2 flights that just connect back to the giant hubs. That's a scale-free network. It's highly centralized.
That is a perfect visualization of the current elite power structure. Now, shape number 2 is the Harary graph.
Right.
Imagine a giant perfect circle of 500 dots. Every dot connects to its immediate neighbors on the circle, but it also has incredibly precise, calculated crisscross connections reaching across the circle to guarantee a minimum level of connectivity.
Okay.
It looks like a highly engineered minimalist hula hoop.
Like a hula hoop with spokes across it. And shape number 3, the random 6 regular expander. Don't think of hubs and spokes for this one. Think of medieval chainmail.
Yes.
A massive mesh where every single metal ring is connected to exactly 6 other rings. There's no center, there are no giant hubs, there are no tiny spokes. It is completely uniformly distributed, but the connections are randomized across the whole mesh, so there are no predictable local patterns.
Chainmail is the exact right mental image. So, to figure out which of these 3 shapes wins the war game, we have to consult the 4 foundational load-bearing theorems of network graph theory. These are basically the laws of physics for networks.
Walk us through the math, but let's keep it grounded in reality. What is the first law?
The first law is Whitney's inequality.
Whitney's inequality.
Simply put, this law states that there is no cheap robustness. If you want a network to survive a certain number of simultaneous failures, let's call that number of failures F, then every single node in your network must have a minimum connection degree of at least 1 more than that failure number.
So F plus 1.
Yes, you have to pay for redundancy with actual physical connections.
Okay, so if I want my bridge to survive 3 of its support cables snapping at the exact same time, I can't cheat the physics. Every single section of that bridge must be supported by at least 4 independent cables. If I only have 3 and 3 snap, I fall in the river.
You nailed it. You cannot bypass Whitney. The second law is Menger's theorem.
Menger's theorem.
This theorem proves that network connectivity is exactly equal to redundant disjoint paths, meaning for the network to be truly secure, there can be no single relay or bottleneck whose loss isolates anyone.
This goes back to our canyon analogy. It is not enough to have 4 heavy cables on one dirt road bridge, because if a single meteor hits that one bridge or a hacker corrupts that one structural broker,
Right.
it doesn't matter how many cables you had, both cities are cut off. To satisfy Menger's theorem, you need 4 completely separate independent bridges spanning the canyon at 4 different locations. An attacker has to sever all 4 independent routes to cut off the flow.
You are tracking the logic perfectly. The third law is Harary's theorem, which gives us the minimum edge result.
Okay, the floor.
It tells us the absolute mathematical floor, the minimum number of connections or edges needed to satisfy Whitney and Menger. It calculates the absolute least amount of asphalt and steel you can buy to guarantee the survival of the network. If you build a Harary graph, you hit this minimum floor with surgical precision.
Okay, so Whitney and Harary tell us the bare minimum materials needed to build the redundant bridges. But what about the fourth law? Because minimum materials doesn't always mean it's actually strong in a real-world scenario.
Which brings us to the fourth law, the Fiedler or Cheeger limit. This is often represented by the Greek letter lambda 2.
Lambda 2.
This measures the algebraic connectivity, or what we can think of as the network's spectral elasticity. It measures something completely different than the other three. It doesn't just ask if a graph is minimally connected. It measures how hard it is to violently cut the graph into large, isolated pieces.
Uh,
So, Whitney and Harary tell us the minimum materials needed to theoretically survive. But Fiedler's Lambda 2 tells us whether the bridge shatters like a pane of glass or bends and flexes like a sheet of steel under intense, sustained pressure. It measures the network's graceful degradation.
graceful degradation. That is exactly what Lambda 2 measures. Two networks can have the exact same number of connections and theoretically survive the exact same number of random failures on paper, but one might shatter completely into dust under a sustained intelligent attack while the other holds its core together.
It's the flex.
Exactly. The Lambda 2 score is what separates them.
So we have the rules of the war game. We have our 3 edge-matched shapes with 500 nodes and 1,500 edges. The scale-free airline map, the Harary engineered hula hoop, and the random 6 regular chainmail. Applying these 4 laws of graph stability, which one actually survives the hacker's onslaught?
The quantitative results from the simulation are striking and honestly a bit alarming.
Let's hear it. The scale-free model, which, remember, is the shape of the current U.S. elite power system, the system they rely on to maintain their influence, is the absolute worst performer against adversarial compromise.
Wait, really? The worst?
The worst. It is incredibly, terrifyingly fragile to a targeted hub attack.
The Achilles heel is real.
It is a massive vulnerability. When the simulation subjected the scale-free network to a 20% targeted hub attack, meaning the hacker took out the top 20% of the most connected structural brokers, its giant component, the main connected body of the network, completely collapsed. It fell from a healthy 0.80 down to a fractured 0.51.
Wow.
That is a massive negative 0.29 gap compared to a scenario where the nodes were just removed at random.
Because the hacker isn't taking out the tiny regional airports. They are bombing O'Hare and JFK. And once those massive hubs are gone, the entire scale-free airline network just falls apart into isolated little islands. You can't get from Ohio to Florida because the central hub is gone.
The network is devastated. So what about the Harary graph? Remember, it hits the minimum edge floor perfectly, and it guarantees connectivity on paper.
Right.
But when they ran the test, its Lambda 2 score, its spectral elasticity, was a dismal 0.009.
It shattered like glass.
It shattered into pieces. Because it is essentially highly engineered to be a one-dimensional ring, it resists targeted hub attacks quite well because it doesn't really have massive hubs. But it is incredibly brittle.
There's no flex.
None. It shatters under random node loss or edge cuts. When the simulation removed 50% of its nodes randomly, its giant component dropped to a completely useless 0.06.
Jeez.
The takeaway here is profound minimum edges alone do not equal minimum stable. You cannot just build the theoretical floor and expect it to survive a war zone.
Which brings us to the undisputed winner of the war game, the medieval chainmail.
The random 6 regular expander graph.
Tell us exactly why it wins.
It wins because of the word regular. In a regular graph, every single node has the exact same number of connections. In this case, every single node has exactly 6 connections. By enforcing this absolute equality of distribution, it structurally erases hubs entirely.
Oh, that is genius. If every single node has exactly 6 connections, there is no JFK or O'Hare for the hacker to target. The hacker looks at the map and can't find a weak point because every point is exactly the same strength.
Let's take that a step further. It fundamentally converts a targeted, intelligent attack into a random blind attack.
Wow.
When the researchers ran the 20% targeted hub attack on the 6 regular expander, the gap between random failure and targeted failure was exactly 0.00.
0.
The Achilles heel is completely eliminated because there is no heel to strike. Furthermore, its Lambda 2 score, its elasticity, hits 1.528.
Which means?
In mathematical terms, this is spectrally optimal. It basically hits the Ramanujan bound, which is calculated as 2 times the square root of 5.
The Ramanujan bound.
Yes, it bends like high-grade steel. Even when the hacker destroyed a staggering 50% of all its edges, it held together a massive 0.98 giant component.
It is functionally indestructible within its budget. It just absorbs the damage and roots around it effortlessly.
It is the pinnacle of resilience. But this raises an important question, and the researchers point out a profound, almost tragic irony here.
What's that?
The hub and relay structure that the elite power brokers currently use, the scale-free model, is highly efficient for moving capital, policy, and personnel quickly in peacetime. It takes very little energy to send a message through a massive hub.
It's fast.
Right, but mathematically, that exact efficiency is their greatest vulnerability. If an adversary, whether a foreign state, a systemic financial crisis, or a populist uprising, knows exactly where to strike, the elite network collapses.
So the thesis is that the minimum stable network, the ultimate defensible structure, is a regular expander graph where the connection degree is equal to the expected failures plus 1. You must eliminate the hubs, you must democratize the connections. But as fascinating as this digital war game is, we have to bring this back to messy human reality. The mathematical model is incredibly clean, but human institutions are flesh and blood.
They are very messy, and the sources are careful to explain the limitations of this clean mathematical model. The graph test we just spent all this time discussing assumes a deletion-only adversary.
Right.
It assumes a node is removed, a bank goes bankrupt, a server is destroyed, or an edge is cut. But in the real world of political influence and systemic power, a node doesn't usually just disappear.
Okay, what does it do?
What if an institution stays fully active, its servers are humming, its people are coming to work, but it is internally subverted?
Oh.
What if a federal regulatory agency is quietly captured by the exact industry it's supposed to regulate? Or a prominent think tank is bought out by dark money from a foreign intelligence service?
Wait, hold on, back up. You're not deleting the node in the war game anymore. You're turning it into a traitor. It's actively working against the network from the inside.
Yes. In advanced network theory and computer science, this is known as the Byzantine general problem, or the Byzantine case. And when you introduce traitors, the math changes dramatically.
How so?
To survive a deletion threat, we establish you need your connections to equal failures plus 1.
Right, F plus 1.
But to survive a Byzantine threat, having that basic redundancy isn't enough. You need the network to reach consensus and agree on what is true, even when active nodes are lying to it. To achieve that, mathematical proofs show you need 3 times the failures, plus 1, in redundancy.
3 times the redundancy. So if I have a regulatory agency that's been bought out by industry and it's feeding false data to the network, I need triple the amount of independent verifying connections just to outvote the traitor and keep the system functioning.
I can confirm that is exactly what the math requires. You need 3 F plus 1 redundancy. It is a vastly heavier, more expensive design requirement. It means you need massive layers of independent verification.
That is a staggering architectural cost.
It is. Furthermore, if we look back at the Relay Atlas, it shows us that real power networks are multiplex.
Multiplex,
Yeah.
meaning multiple layers.
Right. They aren't just one flat layer of dots and lines. They are multi-layered three-dimensional webs. You have the finance layer, the personnel layer, the policy layer, the epistemic knowledge layer, and these layers are incredibly dynamic.
Always shifting.
They're constantly rewiring in real time as people change jobs through the revolving door. A collapse in the financial layer, like the eurodollar freeze we discussed, might cascade instantly into the policy layer, rewiring the political priorities of the network overnight.
So given all of this weight, the fragility of the scale-free model, the terrifying requirements of surviving Byzantine traders with 3 plus 1, the chaotic multiplex layers, how do we actually reform the real U.S. decision system?
It's the ultimate question.
Because we can't just burn it all down and build a utopian chainmail grid tomorrow. We need institutional capacity to run a country of 330 million people. How do you fix a plane while you are flying it?
The sources point to a very specific, pragmatic strategy. You don't try to ban expertise, and you don't waste time playing whack-a-mole chasing individual bad actors. You target the architecture itself. Specifically, you target the opacity interface.
Like opacity interfaces.
Yeah.
The dark spots where the layers meet and the rules get murky. The dirt road bridges.
Exactly. The researchers proposed 2 primary interventions to shine a light on these interfaces. The first is revolving door transparency.
Okay.
We know from the relay model that the personnel to consulting pipeline is where government relationships are most directly monetized.
Right. This is the classic move. Someone leaves a high-level post at the Department of Defense, and the next week they start a boutique strategic advisory firm, like the ones mentioned in the sources West Exec Advisors or Pine Island Capital.
Exactly.
They aren't technically lobbying, so they avoid those disclosures, but they are selling their structural betweenness centrality to defense contractors.
It happens constantly. Now, the proposed reform wouldn't ban them from making a living or utilizing their expertise.
Right. They can still work.
But it would mandate rigorous cooling-off periods and extreme public disclosures. If a consulting firm is staffed primarily by former senior government officials, they must have transparent client reporting. You make the pathway visible and publicly contestable. You strip away the performative compliance.
If you are going to be a bridge, everyone gets to see who is driving across you.
Uh-huh.
I like it. And the second intervention.
Clustering and flow monitoring.
Okay.
The relay model mathematically predicts that because of the network structure, resources will constantly recirculate through the exact same intermediary bridge nodes.
The same hubs.
Yes. So instead of having underfunded regulators trying to track every single isolated financial transaction, which is a game they will always lose against offshore law firms, independent watchdogs need to monitor what they call recirculation density.
Recirculation density, tracking the volume, not just the individual drops of water.
Yes. When repeated, high-value financial flows continually pass through the same structural brokers, especially in the immediate aftermath of regulatory scrutiny or policy shifts. It should trigger an automatic external review.
You monitor the hubs?
You aggressively monitor the hubs, and you use oversight mechanisms that are entirely external to the network because internal compliance systems will always eventually just reproduce the assumptions and incentives of the network they are embedded in.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you navigate your day-to-day life? The takeaway here isn't some populist burn-it-to-the-ground cry to destroy the elite. The complexity of modern global society absolutely requires specialized governance and deep expertise.
Very true.
The goal of reform is institutional legibility. Transparency isn't about destroying the network. It's about making the network legible, understandable, and contestable to the public. Because when the public can't see how the plumbing works, when they feel the economic pain of a euro-dollar freeze but are told the economy is booming, you get a legitimacy recession. You get deep corrosive cynicism.
That is the ultimate danger. Citizens can tolerate policy disagreement, and they can even tolerate unequal outcomes much more easily than they can tolerate systems they cannot meaningfully see or understand. A verification-first approach to analyzing these networks offers a rational path forward. It is the desperately needed middle ground between naive, blind trust in institutions and wild, unhinged, conspiratorial overreach.
We've covered an incredible, sweeping amount of ground today. We journeyed from the dense relay networks of Washington think tanks and the revolving door, all the way to the offshore tax havens and eurodollar black holes exposed in the Paradise Papers.
It's a lot to process.
It is. We ran a complex digital war game using the 4 load-bearing theorems of graph stability, proving mathematically that the hub-and-spoke models of elite power are structurally fragile and that regular expander graphs, the chainmail meshes, are the true fortresses of resilience. And we looked at practical structural steps for democratic reform that target the opacity interfaces.
It truly provides a completely new lens for looking at the world.
It is a paradigm shift. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. Something that builds on all this math, but takes it a step further into your own life.
Let's hear it.
If the math objectively proves that true, unshakable stability requires a network to be regular, meaning power, connections, and resources must be equally distributed among all nodes rather than hoarded by central hubs, then maybe the ultimate defense against a corrupt or fragile system isn't to try and hack their hubs.
That's a fascinating proposition. Let's take that a step further.
Maybe the answer is to build our own civic and democratic networks to be structurally regular. If we build community networks, mutual aid systems, resilient local supply chains, and grassroots governance models where everyone has equal connectivity, if we build a functional regular expander graph of our own from the ground up, we wouldn't just be surviving the shadow system.
Right.
We would be forcing the existing mathematically fragile hub-and-spoke power structures to bend to a mathematically undeniable distributed strength.
A minimum stable network, but one built by citizens for citizens.
Exactly. So the next time you see a headline about a massive corporate merger or a politician sliding into a cushy consulting gig or a confusing economic warning sign about offshore collateral, don't just see the surface-level X-ray. Look at the water pressure. Look at the structural brokers. Look at the invisible networks around you with a new mathematical lens. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.